Hi, GERO 200 friends. It is Sunday, June 22nd, and we are going to power through and do Module 13 now, which is financial power of attorney and elder abuse. And those two things, as we will see, go hand in hand.
Same day, same outfit.
Yeah, we're not going to change between take. All right.
So she sets all this up. She does all the financial planning. She also cuts all of our hair. Check that out, man.
I only know one haircut. I learned it off YouTube.
Perfect.
So someday I'm going to learn more
All right.
haircuts.
Okay. Right.
Okay, so we're
Ready?
going to go into Module 13.
13.
So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about power of attorney and they'll abbreviate it POA, power of attorney. So if you see me do that when I'm typing, sorry about that. I try not to use too many acronyms. But basically, we talked about power of attorney for healthcare. We also can have a power of attorney that gives someone else the legal authorization to act on your behalf in financial matters. So, in the olden times, if you wanted to buy or sell a house and you had to be traveling and couldn't physically be present to sign forms, then you would have to give someone a power of attorney. Usually your, spouse or partner or child or parent or whatever, someone who could sign for you. Nowadays, we have a lot of DocuSign type documents, and so that makes it easier for you to sign documents if you're not physically present in the state where things are happening.
In certain cases, she was the executrix for her dad's estate when he passed, and he was in Louisiana, and we went back there and read the will, and everything was all good. However, there was a lot of steps that had to be taken and needed somebody to be able to sign off and do the work.
Yeah.
And so she
Yeah.
made the
So,
attorney, gave him the power of attorney financial to do
yeah.
these
And that's
things.
because their real estate process is different than our real estate process in California. So they do have a closing or active sale where the people physically gather in a conference room and sign documents. And so I needed someone to physically be present and sign documents. And I didn't want to have to fly back and forth and spend a ton of money doing that or time. And so I was able to name an attorney, the local probate attorney, to be my agent and to carry out my wishes.
This stuff's super important. God forbid a family member gets, hurt and they're incapacitated. Bills still have to be paid, and so having access to their accounts, whether it's their checking and savings accounts or their investment accounts or brokerage accounts to transfer into there to pay the bills, somebody has to be able to get the money and send it out to the people that are asking for the money.
Yeah. So the principal is the person who has the money. So if I'm the owner of the account, or I'm the owner of the house, or I'm the owner of the car, I'm the principal. The person I name to make my decisions is my agent, just like my real estate agent.
Proxy or agent.
That's my proxy, that's my agent. And that's the person who gets the power. The scope of the power will be specified in the power of attorney document. And you can give them a very limited power to only sign for this time period. You can sign these documents for me. Or what I've done with John and what John's done with me is a broad power of attorney where he can make transactions. He could buy and sell real estate. He could buy and sell stocks. He can handle insurance issues. And I think there's even a catch-all phrase at the bottom and anything else that we didn't list. So that power of attorney has a bunch of different things, and we've checked all of the above. So that it's a very broad power of attorney. It's a durable power of attorney because it went into effect the day that I signed it, because I trust John and I also handle all the finances. So I know he's not going to do anything because I would notice it right away.
This is important. The case study is my older brother who's alone and very naive, and so for a number of reasons we have power of attorney financial over for him, or we just monitor his bank accounts.
Okay? Yeah, so I help him pay his bills. I monitor his bank accounts. I manage his retirement funds. I manage his homeowners and car insurance. I manage his health insurance. I help him with his doctor appointments, and I can do all this online, so it's not too difficult. And he's really overwhelmed by technology. So if he gets an email from his insurance company or he gets an email from his doctor, he doesn't know what to do. Even if it says like press here, he doesn't know what to do. And some of that is he's having some cognitive declines as he gets older. He's in his 70s. Some of that is because he has problems with addiction. So we're, providing family support for him to try to protect him and to keep him safe and secure as long as we can, but while also trying to keep him as independent as we can.
And we also, by being on top of his account, notice abnormal activity,
Yeah.
large withdrawals. And so we got on it immediately. And this is going to tap into our later lecture about elder abuse.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
we found out he'd met someone in a bar that he'd known for a couple months that came to him and said, I need help buying a car. Can you please help me? And so she was abusing him financially because she had no assets. She had very little going on, not working or working part-time. And she sees him in the bar and thinks this guy's a good target.
Yeah, so she was manipulating him, and his head was spinning, and then we intervened, and
well, we were just able to say, hey, look, you don't have Jeff Bezos kind of money.
Yeah.
You can't afford to buy people cars.
Obviously, it's a very touchy subject, and it took a while for him to accept what was going on, and it's still sadly a moving target.
Still ongoing.
Yeah,
We're working on it.
That's life.
So anyway,
all right, should we go into the
go into the reading assignment. So when we talk about power of attorneys, I mentioned that John and I have a durable power of attorney that's effective the day you sign it. You can have a springing power of attorney that only goes into effect when you're incapacitated. I don't love those because then it can become an argument of whether the person has capacity or lacks capacity, and then you've got to get doctors and lawyers involved and potentially end up in court to enforce your power of attorney.
Yeah, and you don't want to wait to get access, with the durable. It's there, it's go time.
And then you could have a conventional power of attorney for a limited time period. So I'm going to be traveling for the next month. I sign a conventional power of attorney that says it's effective now, and it ends either when I tear it up and say you're not power of attorney anymore, or when I become mentally incapacitated and then maybe someone else takes over.
So this is go time all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. This is this question of capacity, which is iffy. I mean, with my brother, it would have been horrible to have to go and have somebody judge his capacity. We went in right away, and then that's a real special case.
I mean, do I think he's having cognitive issues? Yes. Does he think he's having cognitive issues? Probably not. And that's a struggle when you're dealing with someone who is starting to lose a little bit of their mental abilities, that they may not be able to recognize it as easily as the people around them. So who do you want to choose to be your agent for a power of attorney for financial? You want to be really careful. You want to choose someone who is financially stable. You want to choose someone who's good with money, who's good with records, who's very detail oriented. So if you have a friend or a cousin or a nephew who's unemployed and has drug or alcohol problems and, has been in prison in the past for embezzling money, that's probably not who you're going to pick to be your durable power of attorney for financial. You want someone that you can trust. Now, a lot of times what people do is they say, oh, I want my son to be my power of attorney. I'm just going to add him to my account. That's a bad idea. If you add another person to your bank account or to your brokerage account or to whatever, then they have the right independently to go in and take everything out of that account. So it's a big temptation to put in front of someone. If you name someone as a power of attorney, they do not have the right to spend your money for anything other than your needs. So they don't have an ownership interest in your account. So you only have the authority to pay that person's bills, help them, buy and sell their car, and do things like that. So the other thing that I think is a really good idea and that we've used with John's brother is, we went down to his credit union, we had the power of attorney in hand, and we said, hey, we want to be able to access his account to see what's going on. He's having some problems, got a DUI, lost his driver's license, having some other issues, and we're concerned that we may need to step in and pay his bills for him if things go wrong. And so the person at the credit union, initially, she was a little skeptical of us. And I was very happy to see that, because she was doing what she needed to do and what people who work in financial institutions are trained to do. And that's be on the alert for financial abuse of an elder and make sure that someone isn't walking into the bank and saying, hey, I'm going to take over this person's account. So she was very careful, but we talked with her, we explained the situation. And
he was present.
And he was present with us. And he was just telling her, because he's kind of, simple. I mean that in the nicest way. I love him dearly. He was just like, whatever they say, whatever they say. But she was being really careful to make sure
Asking the right
this is what he wanted. And so I loved seeing that. And at one point she did say to us, once she decided that she trusted us, she said, should I just put you on his account? And I'm like, no. I told her,
you don't want that responsibility.
and I told her, I teach about this, and that's not what I recommend. I don't think we need to be on his account. We just need to be able to monitor it and help him pay his bills. It's great if you can have an app or have someone who is authorized to access the person's account. So I used to have an app called the Mint app. I loved it because it would show me.
It didn't last that long.
Yeah, they went under. So I haven't found another app that's quite as good. But if you have an app that can monitor the person's accounts and tell you, hey, their credit card bill was a lot higher than usual, or they had an unusual expense. Someone went and bought a watch at Tiffany's, something that you think, well, grandma wouldn't go spend $10,000.
We took the time, and using our eyes, we're sifting through the account. It's like, whoa, what? All of a sudden, $3,000 was removed from the bank via ATM, and then $4,000, and
Yeah.
$3,000. It was just like bam, 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 and it was out of character. So
Yeah. So it's good to have, even if one person's named durable power of attorney for financial, you have a second person in the family who's still keeping an eye on the accounts and making sure that there's not large withdrawals.
all right,
And so that's kind of a
lean
fancy.
into your discussion. And
Wait,
so,
I'm not done yet.
okay.
The last thing. So you
Just
name
anticipate.
someone, okay, and this goes for our last lecture
There it is.
too. If you name someone durable power of attorney for healthcare or for financial, you want to revisit that document if you move, if you get married or divorce, if you're the person that you've named as an agent dies. And so periodically, I would say every 5 years, or if you have a major life change, you're going to go back, you're going to revisit that power of attorney, and you're going to say, hey, I need to update it to say that this person's going to be my agent. So after COVID, we updated our power of attorneys because, I think when we drafted the original ones, our kids were like in elementary school. And then we went back, and two of the people that we named as agent, one had passed away, one was in almost 80 years old. And so we said, okay, our children are old enough now that we could give them this power, give them this responsibility, and we feel comfortable with it. We asked them, do you feel comfortable with it? They said yes. So you want to be able to go back and
We actually waited too long to do it. So yeah. So you should review this pretty frequently.
Yeah, I think every 5 years is good, or when you have a major life change.
Yeah.
If you want to cancel your power of attorney, you tear it up, you sign a new one. A court's always going to look, and a bank is always going to look at the one that's dated the most recently. You notify the person who was your agent, you're not my agent anymore. That can be also difficult. But you just want to make sure that you have clear documentation that you've changed your mind. Now, a lot of banks require you to use their form. So if you have a relative that doesn't have a lot of assets, but they do have a bank account, or maybe they have a retirement account, then you're probably going to want to go to that institution. And this is how you could avoid hiring an attorney to do a power of attorney for financial anyway. You go to that bank, and they will have their own form that they will give to you, and you'll have to get it signed, potentially notarized or witnessed. And then you bring it back to them, and that will give you the authority over that person's account. Okay, so now I'm done with power of attorney for financial. Let's talk elder abuse.
Here's your charge.
So I know a lot of times I have students who say to me, in the US, you have this problem with elder abuse, but we don't have that in our country because we respect older people and we have a culture of taking care of older people. But what we're actually seeing in research is that in every country around the world, we're seeing more cases of elder abuse. And that is because family caregivers are often sandwiched between their own children, their busy careers, and taking care of their older relatives. And so we don't want to dismiss that this could be a factor in other places other than the US. I totally agree. We have a problem in the US that we do not respect and care for older people as well as we could, and we can learn a lot from other cultures and other countries. But definitely don't overlook the fact that elder abuse is something that happens around the world. So, um, one of the big problems we have with elder abuse is that it's very common. So, 1 in 10 people in the US report some type of elder abuse in the last year. The most common is financial abuse by a family member, then neglect, emotional abuse, where someone's verbally abusive. Physical abuse, fortunately, is much less likely to happen, and sexual abuse is the least likely to happen. But oftentimes, sexual abuse will happen in an institutional setting, and it may be by a staff member or another patient. Oftentimes, people with dementia act out sexually. You can scroll down.
Yeah. In the case of my brother, it was this in
Yeah.
combination,
So
and also tapping into his insecurities. So, swaying his addiction into a really bad direction by, being a drinker, and and it was also what happens is Julie will talk about when this is happening. A big part of the emotional abuse is then you isolate the person from the people that actually care for them, and it's a big issue.
yeah. So, most of the time, the abusers are people who have access, people who are close to the person. So, most of the time, that's going to be family members. So, it could be children, it could be spouses or partners, long-term partners. It could be the grandson or the nephew that's living with the older person because the grandson's unemployed or having a little trouble launching or something like that. Um, and that creates this really unfortunate dynamic that the people who are being abused have a lot of shame, and are reluctant to report what's going on because you're not just reporting some stranger who committed a crime against you, you're reporting a loved one who's committed a crime against you. So we'll go down and we'll see that 93% of elder abuse is never reported, because people feel ashamed. And I think it's even worse in cultures where older people are expected to be treated well and expected to be treated with dignity and venerated, because then it's even more shameful when a member of your family has done this to you.
And why all family members, as a majority, 90%,
They
well,
have
they
access.
have access, and it's part of it too is that, you think caregiving is going to be easy. It's very stressful, and people that are caregivers, from the stress doesn't make it right, but do the wrong things. And then when it comes down to money, it's pretty bad that people will look at how easy a target that older
Well,
person
it's a
is.
crime of opportunity,
Yeah.
where people say, oh, this person has a ton of money and they're old and they don't need it, blah, blah, blah. So people with dementia, we know, are very high risk of being victims of elder abuse. So this one study, almost 50% of the participants who had dementia were victimized by their caregivers. And that's partly because people with dementia are difficult to handle. So there's a lot of caregiver stress, but it's also because people with dementia may not be viewed as being reliable reporters. So they may say, so and so's yelling at me, so and so's hitting me, so and so's hurting me. And then if they say that to another caregiver or a doctor, maybe it isn't taken that seriously because people think, oh, that's just the dementia talking. It's not a real life thing that's happening. We care about elder abuse not just because it's wrong, because it has a powerful effect on the person's health. So people who are victims of elder abuse, self-neglect is also considered a form of elder abuse. are much more likely to die within a year. They're almost 6 times more likely to die within a year. If they're a victim of abuse by another person, they're twice as likely to die if it's a confirmed case. 1.5-ish times more likely to die if it's a suspected case. So we're seeing that it can have a very powerful effect on the person's health. Now, I like these graphics that we're scrolling through right now. They're from the World Health Organization. And so they explain the different types of abuse. So you might have someone who's a victim of physical abuse. So you might see an older person that has unexpected bruises on their wrists, on their arms, on their face. Maybe their glasses are broken. You might try to reach grandma or grandpa or auntie or uncle, and the person who's their caregiver says, well, they said they don't want to talk to you, or they're asleep right now, or yeah, they can't come to the phone right now. So if you start to see those signs of someone being isolated and you're not able to reach that person, then you got to make sure that someone in your family or someone reliable can put eyes on that older person and confirm that they are doing okay. And again, we talked financial exploitation. It's a crime of opportunity. A lot of older people have more assets and they're isolated. And they may have asked for help paying their bills or conducting financial transactions and then get taken
And
advantage of.
these go hand in hand with this because there's a lot of threats. If you let other people know what's going on, so you get them isolated, bad things are going to happen to you, and it's very there's a lot of manipulation that goes on.
Yeah.
So.
And so obviously the people who are the perpetrators of elder abuse, family members, healthcare workers. And so that doesn't mean that when you take your grandma to the doctor that the doctor's going to beat her. It probably means that they're in an assisted living facility, they're in an adult daycare, they're in a long-term care facility, a nursing home, and that those healthcare workers, when no one else is around, are doing things. Sometimes they're stealing from the elderly person. We see a lot of financial abuse where their belongings are stolen while they're in an institutional setting, or they may just be verbally abusive or physically abusive. Especially because these caregivers, paid caregivers, oftentimes have a lot of patients to deal with. They're dealing with patients that are hard to deal with, and that can come out in terms of
And
aggression.
there could be better screening by
Yeah.
the employers at these facilities,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
So.
So I love this World Health Organization research because it really drills down to what are the risk factors? What are the risk factors for the victim? And what are the risk factors for the person who's committing the elder abuse? And so the strong risk factors are things like, is the person disabled so that they're physically dependent on their caregiver? Do they have poor physical health? They're probably going to be much more likely to be isolated. Are they depressed? So they're going to be more I guess less likely to ask for help. And are they going to be low income or low socioeconomic status? My law school professor, I always quote him, he said rich people get better stuff. So if you are a wealthy person living in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, you might have a gardener, you might have a cleaning lady, you might have a personal trainer who comes to your house a couple times a week. You might have, other people. You might have someone that brings you food. You might order, Uber Eats or whatever, but you have a lot of different people that are seeing you on a regular basis, a lot of different people that could report that you appear to be a victim of abuse. If you are low income, you're living in a small apartment, you don't have a car, you don't get out much, you may have limited mobility, you may not see other people a lot, you may not have internet access, you may not have a phone in order to communicate with people and let people know what's going on, and fewer people are seeing you. So it's really important for us to make sure that those vulnerable people aren't so isolated that they're going to be real vulnerable to elder abuse. And then in terms of the individual, we see that individual caregivers who suffer from depression, substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, they are much more likely to commit elder abuse. And if they are dependent on the older person that is being abused financially, emotionally, or just from a family relationship standpoint. So maybe it seems like a great idea to let the grandson move in with the grandmother because, the grandson can have a free place to live and the grandmother gets someone that helps. But you have to keep an eye on the situation, because if that grandson is going through a rough time, they haven't been able to find a job, maybe they're struggling with addiction, maybe they're sad because this isn't how they thought their life was going to end up. It creates a situation with caregiver stress where they may be more likely to result in elder abuse against the older person.
And I hate to bring it up, but then my brother's situation, it was this person at a local bar, but it's almost like it's their profession to seek out people like him, and 20 years his youth, and an alcoholic, and then brought him on board because he has a history of substance abuse for a lot of things, and and she's totally dependent on him financially for a lot of really unnecessary spending, so a lot of the boxes can get checked by somebody who's not a family member. So
Yeah, absolutely.
awesome.
So we've given another graphic just with kind of perspectives from different people, talking about the sense of shame, particularly among Chinese older adults, where elder abuse is correlated with an increased risk of suicide by the victims because they are so ashamed and unwilling to report the person who's abusing them, thinking this is such a difficult situation, I'd rather kill myself than deal with it. And so it's important to have some of this
A
context.
lot of you guys are going to become, go into wealth management and financial planning, and this again, validates the perspective that we were talking about, and again, in my brother's case, through our help with him investing, he's sitting on a reasonable pot of money, and I think people become aware of it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so scroll down a little bit more. So the last thing we want to talk about in terms of elder abuse is that elder abuse and loneliness and isolation go hand in hand, because when that older person doesn't see a lot of people, they don't have strong social connections, they're not going to have the opportunity to report the elder abuse, they're not going to have the opportunity to be rescued from the elder abuse. But there's also this tremendous health effect from loneliness, and I do think it's important to remember that being alone is not the problem. You can be alone. Trust me, during the pandemic, I was pretty content because I have my dogs, I have my family, I have my garden, I have my books that I could read, I could watch Netflix. I was like, hey, this is actually awesome. So being alone isn't the problem. It's if you're lonely and you don't feel a sense of connection. So a lot of older people are isolated, and that leads to loneliness where they don't have a connection. It leads to a higher risk of dementia. They've established that the risk of loneliness for an older person is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We all know smoking cigarettes is bad for you. Seniors that live in facilities, institutional settings, have a higher rate of depression.
this is right here is a super high risk for heart disease and even cancer. So
Yeah, so loneliness and that lack of social connection um, can create a lot of stress in your body, which affects your immune system, etc. So what are the things that create your risk of isolation and loneliness? Being over 80, so you're a lot less mobile, having chronic health problems, it's harder to get out of your house, not having close contact with family. Come on, Lucy. We're never lonely because we have,
she's gonna go hide. She's
laying down.
She's hot.
We're never lonely because we have two dogs and they're always constantly in our face.
No, and they actually, all the risk factors that we're talking about, they check the box to avoid. They're very loud, they're very big, and people say, yeah, maybe not that house, maybe not that family. So,
being low income. But I also think it's important to look at the community. So, for example, our community provides free transportation to older people in the community, to doctor appointments, and to the senior center so that they can go and do senior classes and play bridge or whatever it is that they do. And then changing family structures. So, we have a lot of families that don't have kids. We have a lot of families where it's married, divorced, you got stepkids, you got half kids, whatever. And so, and what's the other thing that's really common in the US? I was born and grew up in the Midwest, the South, the East, and now I live in California. So I was thousands of miles away from my parents when they got older. So we have that issue of isolation with the older people. But there are solutions. Like I said, my community gives access to transportation. And I think they even had like the equivalent of the free Lyft situation with USC. They had kind of a free or discounted Uber Lyft deal in our community to help get seniors out of their homes. We got to work to make communities that are senior friendly. So, for example, we have a senior apartment, an independent living apartment for seniors that's right across the street from our grocery store. There's a pharmacy, there's a grocery store, there's a Starbucks, there's a doctor's office. So we see them all the time walking across the street to go visit one of these things. So a good walkable community is really
And
helpful.
then kind of a new movement solution too to, you know, I mean, we talked about generational problems and your lack of ability to be able to afford housing is a lot of real estate developers are seeing this in the more really expensive communities, and they're creating these multi-generational communities where and again, you have to have some foresight where you can work things out. So how people can live in harmony together, and that way grandma and grandpa can help care for your kids, and then you and your kids can then help care for them, and then even a kind of a community concept to that. So.
Yeah. And California has passed laws like making it easier to build what we call a granny flat or an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, in your backyard. So you could build a little studio apartment in your backyard. The LA Times has had a series of articles covering some really amazing ADUs that are gorgeous and designed by, unbelievable designers. But you could throw a little one room, you could buy one off of Amazon, I think now, throw a little one room studio apartment in your backyard, and then grandma and grandpa can live there and walk inside the house for dinner, and they have privacy, but they still have support. Then using technology, I think, is really important. We discovered during the pandemic how significant the effect of isolation was on seniors who were in community settings, like assisted living, like nursing homes. And then we started to make available to them iPads and other types of technology where you can FaceTime your family members or Zoom or, keep in touch in that way. So we've got to really work to connect seniors with family and friends using technology so that they're not so isolated.
All right. So all this goes back to, okay, a lot to think about, but that's why you're taking this class. We can educate you. Just so then tap into your discussion, just the different aspects, risk factors. We just went through that. Okay. This is kind of like the you do this if you're comfortable with it, kind of disclosure, if you've seen it and how did it make you feel? All right. Okay. I think we're done again.
We are.
All
Yeah.
right. All right.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Fight on.